Let me tell you something. We have great guests. We've already had a couple on today. We have more to come. But I watched Matt Baker's timeline, and not just over the last few months with all of the uneasiness with the ACC and FSU and Clemson, et cetera. But I watched his coverage, and he's joining us now from the Tampa Bay Times. He's damn good at what he does. He hustles. He does a great job. He never goes over the edge with just how he feels maybe, but also reporting the story. Matt, thanks for your time, and I mean that. And I even told you that earlier in the week. What were your thoughts about, let's go to ACC Media Days, how Jim Phillips handled the first day? Because it seems like after he spoke, there just wasn't much said anymore about drama, at least not this week.
Well, thanks for having me on it, and thanks for the kind words. Yeah, you're right. Jim Phillips sounded a little bit different to me than he has in the past. Defensive, I don't know if that's the right word. I don't know if offensive is the right word, but maybe a little bit more fiery. And I understand why. I mean, the perception right now of the ACC is not, it's not great, right? You know, their two biggest brands, or two of the biggest brands, have been yelling about trying to leave, and there's lawsuits, and there's all this stuff. And some of it doesn't matter, right? Judges eventually are going to weigh in on whatever they think. At some point, there's probably going to be a number between 0 and 572 million, where Florida State and Clemson can get out and do their own thing. But in the meantime, perception does matter. Look at what happened with the Pac-12 and the way that disappeared, because it's one of the things like with a bank, right? Everybody thinks the bank is running out of money, and everyone goes and takes their money. Then the bank runs out of money. It's almost one of those things. So I think it was important for Jim Phillips, the ACC commissioner, to be as I guess passionate as he was, and a little bit out of his character. But to your other point, yeah, there didn't seem to be a lot of drama, and honestly, I didn't expect a lot. Florida State, Mike Norvell and Dabo Swinney at Clemson, this decision with the lawsuits and where they're going to go, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12. That's way above their pay grade, and it's a very big pay grade. Don't get me wrong, but those decisions are made by the presidents and the trustees and what have you, not the football coaches. So, I'm sure Mike and Dabo have some thoughts about where they'd like to be, but like this time of year, I'm also pretty sure what they're thinking about is, okay, how are we going to shore up our third down defense this year, and how are we going to be better in the red zone so we don't kick as many field goals?
By the way, to follow up on Smokey's open for Matt, you know how I know Matt is one of the best sports writers in Florida, in particular, is that every fan base thinks that he hates them.
That is correct.
Yeah, there's a section of every fan base, whether it's USF, UCF, Florida State, Florida, Miami, FAU. Well, every time Matt Baker writes about us, it's negative. Which means he's doing his job because.
Well,
yeah, go
ahead.
Right,
and the important thing here is that you and we know the truth of which fan base that I actually hate, of which school that I actually hate, and which rival I love the most. You and I know that truth. No need to repeat it. If you know, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, when it comes to the court cases and everything going on, I think it was nice to hear once again, even though it was said back in June, that none of this is happening this year. So it puts the Florida State and Clemson will be in the Big 12 on July 1st of next year completely to rest. And based on what Jim Phillips said, this is going to be a much longer haul than anything else, right?
Yes, I think so. I'm going to put some conference realignment caveats here. I know what's been reported, and I do not think that anything will happen in the next couple of weeks before, I think it's August 15th is when FSU and Clemson will have to say they're leaving for them to be able to be out before the 2025 season. But I want to give my standard caveat. When it comes to conference realignment, only assist deals in absolute. Yeah. Nothing is certain. If I ever say anything is certain or going to happen, slap me upside the head, because I should not be doing that. So there's always a tiny bit of wiggle room, even though I would say with 99% certainty nothing has happened here in the next couple of weeks. Now, to the actual meat of what you were talking about. This is going to go on for potentially a while. I mean, at least in the court cases. I looked a while ago at the comps for times when schools and conferences sued each other, and usually they take about 18 months to resolve themselves. And this one, honestly, could take longer. I don't think the ACC, I don't know if they have an incentive to try to settle earlier. At least at the current moment, they don't, because the contract they think is pretty rock solid, and they can keep going. They've got till 2036 potentially. There's no incentive for them to try to let Florida State or Clemson out early, unless Florida State and Clemson are paying a lot of money. So that's the one thing. And then just as far as the timeline, what I've said for a while, and if I had to put a date on it, again, if I had to put a date on it, watch kind of January or February. According to Florida State, ESPN has the option then to extend the ACC from, I think it's 27 through 36, if I've got my numbers right. And right now that whole thing is still being discussed, it's still being finalized, and at January, February is the deadline. That's the date that I would watch, where typically settlements happen in any civil case when there's a deadline, when there's a ticking time bomb. That, to me, is the most realistic ticking time bomb that I'm aware of. So that's a more realistic date that I would watch.
When it comes to nuts and bolts on the field this year, where do you kind of grade the ACC teams, especially, Florida State, Clemson, Miami, probably the top three, but do you think there's other ones that can maybe bust into that top three?
North Carolina State's interesting because eventually they're going to break out of that between 8 and 9 win thing. Eventually they're going to go one way or the other. They got Grayson McCall out of Coastal Carolina, who I loved him at Coastal. The COVID year, he was about as fun to watch as any player in the country. Can he kind of rekindle that magic with the Wolfpack? I don't know. But as we're kind of looking at it, that's one option outside the top three that really intrigues me. And Virginia Tech is the other one. I'm not entirely sold on what Pry has been doing. I think he's upgraded the roster and made some kind of incremental gains. But people around the league think that the Hokies are maybe getting closer to where they should be. So that's another program that I've got that, maybe they can break into that top three as well.
Matt, this is non-ACC related, but you do write a lot about USF and just, looping that in with conference realignment for the teams that don't have lifeboats. They're scrambling, hoping that there will be one or two left over, right? Some invites after this last go-round. But can you just kind of speak to USF? And it just seems like this last year or so, they've really made a concerted effort to push facilities forward and to try and best position themselves. Would that be accurate?
That is 100% accurate. I have they've been pushing for an on-campus stadium. They've been talking about it since before they actually started classes at USF. That's not an exaggeration. That's an actual fact. So it's been going on for a very, very long time. And now they're at a point where in October they plan to break ground on it. And I feel very confident it's going to happen. I don't know that I would have said that a year ago, and I certainly don't know that I would have said that 2 years ago. But they're doing everything they can to make that stadium and the football operations center that goes with it, to make that a reality. I've kind of evolved my thinking on, is it necessary? To some degree it is, but I would be worried about whether the lifeboats have all left and if there's any coming back from it, But USF thinks if we're going to have a shot at making it to the Power 4, 3, 2, whatever it's going to be in the future, we got to go now. And they're putting $340 million plus interest into this. They've got, I think, a really sharp coach in Alex Golesh. We had a 7-6 first season, which was fine, all things considered. We'll see if they can get that to 9 or 10 this year, and maybe make a run at a conference title this year or next. But they're starting to do the things that they should have done a while ago, frankly, to at least make themselves relevant on the national scale at the G5 level, and then maybe have a chance to where if things go right, kind of like UCF, where UCF kind of caught lightning in a bottle, maybe the Bulls can do that too.
I always, and I stick to this because we covered that time period when the Big 12 was going to lose Texas and Oklahoma, and they reacted that if USF and Memphis had been where they might be now, I don't know about Memphis, they still have some work to do, but if USF would have been where they're about to be 3 or 4 years ago, it would have been interesting to see what the Big 12 would have done.
No question, because USF has a lot of things going for it. We have to remember that realignment is not done, like I said earlier, it's not the football coaches who decide it, it's not the athletic directors, it's the presidents and the trustees. So when you're looking at USF, it's one of the it's a top tier research institution. They're in the AAU, which is a prestigious kind of top tier group of schools that's supposedly a more or less prerequisite to joining the Big Ten. Florida State's not in that, by the way. Miami is. So they've got the academic chops, I think, where they could be in a major conference. Obviously, Tampa is a huge market, top 20. It's growing. Every time I drive by somewhere, it looks like there's a new apartment complex or shopping center or something going up. So there's a lot of stuff to like about it. And in 10, 20 years, you look at the alumni that's cranking out, how big it is and all that stuff. USF could be very, very good and relevant. The problem is that they didn't do a lot of the things that they should have done years ago, and that's putting them behind. Because, you're exactly right. The things had broken differently. They had made the right hire, or, go back to I think it was a 2017 UCF-USF game where it went down to the wire and they lost on a kickoff return for a touchdown. You change that outcome, things could be very, very different. But, ifs and buts and what have you, and USF is where they are now, and they're playing catch-up, trying not to get left behind.
Matt, what do you put the likelihood on Billy Napier still occupying his office in 2025?
That's a great question. I'm going to give you a really bad answer, and I'm going to say, you know what? I'll say 55%. I was going to go 50-50, but I'll go 55. I say that because for a couple of reasons. One is Billy is well-liked in the building, and I think that matters. It mattered with Will Muschamp getting a fourth season, and I think it can matter with Billy. Two, everyone knows how tough the schedule is. So if the team looks better this year, and I think it will, even if that doesn't show up in the standings, if it doesn't show up on the scoreboards, I think the power brokers will understand that a little bit, especially because he made a little bit of noise with the recruiting class that he got. And the other thing here, and I just don't have a read on this, but Florida's president announced last week that he was stepping down. Unfortunately, his wife is in poor health, and obviously you hope for the best for Ben Sass and his family. That's more important than even college football. But as it relates to our conversation, a new president, right now it's going to be an interim president. I don't know for how long. You would think the way this normally goes is the president would fire the athletic director, who would then hire a new one, and that guy would fire the coach and hire a new one. But if there's an interim president, if there's a leadership vacuum there at a school like Florida, I don't have a good read yet on what that might mean. So that's just a complete wild card that we'll see if anything's resolved here in the next couple of months. If they were to lose to UCF or get their tails beat by Georgia or Texas or something, but that's just something I don't have my head wrapped around yet, and I don't know that anybody can. But it's just something to kind of monitor and keep in mind.
Matt, UCF, you brought them up. We'd be remiss to not mention, the school in the Big 12 that we've talked about so much over these last couple of years. But obviously, some lessons learned, I would think, in year number one across all sports. But how do you feel about just the way they've, entered and now try to pivot towards year two and building on this thing?
I think they're going to be better. I think it's going to be growing pains for almost everybody that moves up from a mid-major to a major conference like the Knights did. But I think they've gotten better along the line. I think they've gotten more depth. They've been recruiting at a higher level the last couple of years, and that's going to allow some of their earlier classes to kind of cycle out and boost the talent level. But the big thing is KJ Jefferson. I saw him in person against the Gators in Gainesville. His team wasn't particularly talented, I don't think. New offensive coordinator that week, and he found a way to win in the swamp. He's a big dude. He can run. He can throw. And honestly, when you put him in a Gus Malzahn offense, I'm not going to say he's Cam Newton. Cam's one of the best couple players of my lifetime. Nope, I'm not saying. However, there are some Cam Newton-like qualities to KJ Jefferson's game. And Gus Malzahn obviously did a really good job with Cam. If he can do, even half of that, 30% of that with KJ Jefferson, UCF's going to be in a position where I have no idea who's going to win the Big 12. It's a complete jumble to me, more or less. But I could, if things work out with KJ, I could see UCF, in the top, certainly the top half and maybe top 3, 4, 5.
All right, taking Miami, Florida, Florida State, UCF, and USF. And I know there's a couple of others. Put them in order of who's better.
Florida State, Miami, Florida barely ahead of UCF, and then USF.
See,
I don't.
There you go.
Yeah,
You hate everybody. You absolutely hate them all.
Thank you for making me say it. I appreciate
that. That might seem initially like a pretty simple thing, but you don't know. I mean, who knows? Thanks for your time, Matt. I hope you get a break before I know practices start next week. Craig, did you want anything else from Matt?
No, just keep up the good work, Matt. Enjoy reading your stuff, man.
I do.
All right. Appreciate it.
Matt,
thanks, guys.
Matt Baker, Tampa Bay Times, with us on many things ACC, even USF and even UCF, with the KJ Jefferson note, too.
Yeah, if Matt was like